Wadden TV presents the significance of today in our history.
This day in history, the 2nd of January in the year 1757, British troops occupy Calcutta, India.
However, the seizure of one of the oldest and largest civilizations on Earth was by no means a foregone conclusion, and ultimately came down to luck, conspiracy, and a conveniently placed grove of mango trees. Alivadi was left in charge of a desolate and war-torn realm, and in order to rebuild the infrastructure that had been destroyed, he imposed heavy taxations upon the merchants in his lands. The well-established European factories along the Hooghly River were not exempt from this, and the British traders there grumbled mightily at their shakedown at the hands of this particularly iron-fisted Bengali prince. The situation was only further exacerbated when Alivadi Khan passed away in 1756, leaving his heir, Siraj-ud-Dowla, in charge. Siraj was resentful of the economic and political influence the Europeans had in his domain, and also suspected the British of being part of a coup to dethrone him, though in fairness, he was probably right about that. The French and British began to fortify their trading outposts in Bengal. Siraj immediately demanded they stop, and while the French complied, the British refused. This was all the casus belli the zealous Nawab needed. Siraj launched an assault on the British stronghold at Calcutta in June 1756, taking the city without a struggle, and seizing the lightly manned Fort William within it after only token resistance. English traders within the fort, some 146 men, were escorted into the dungeon, a holding cell intended only to contain 6 or fewer men. Left there for one full night, most of the Englishmen died of asphyxiation and heat stroke. Siraj-ud-Dowla, for his part, seemed genuinely unaware. Nevertheless, the incident, which came to be known as the Black Hole of Calcutta, became emblazoned in the social memory of every Englishman in India, and steeled their resolve to retaliate against the Bengali prince. In Madras, the local governor of the East India Company resolved that Calcutta must be retaken immediately, and appointed the best man for the job, none other than a certain Major Robert Clive. In December 1756, Clive began up the Hooghly River, aboard a squadron of warships, commanding some 600 British soldiers and 900 sepoys. Between them and Calcutta was the Bengali fort of Baj Baj, but one humorous tale relates that while encamped outside it at night, a drunken British seaman stumbled inside the enemy fort by accident and stormed the barricades, taking the battery. After that, the squadron made it to Calcutta, thoroughly shelling the city with their cannons. By January 1757, the defending Bengali garrison quickly abandoned the city, allowing Clive and his men to retake a smouldering, ruined husk that had once been a thriving trade port. In response, Siraj mustered a huge army of 40,000 men, marching south to seize Calcutta once more. They arrived in February, setting up a siege camp outside of the city suburbs, where they engaged in some inconclusive skirmishes with the British garrison. Amidst this deadlock, it was once again the audacious Robert Clive who turned the tides. Creating a vanguard of East India sailors, soldiers and sepoys, he sailed a short distance down the Hooghly River under cover of night and a thick blanket of fog. Disembarking downriver, his marines reached the Bengali camp at 6 AM, at which point they began opening fire. Chaos consumed the encampment. Siraj's men shouted, tripped over themselves, and fired blindly into the fog. Horses ran wild and elephants stampeded, all while Clive and his men continued to shoot their way through the camp, eventually making their way across the Bengali ditch and back into Fort William. Casualties were light. Clive lost only 57 men, while Siraj had lost 600 out of his total 40,000. Nevertheless, the Bengali prince sued for peace. On February 9th, the Treaty of Alinagar was signed between the company and Bengal. It was essentially status quo antebellum, with the British now able to fortify their outposts unopposed. With the Bengali problem pacified, the company turned its attention to France. The 7 Years' War was at full steam. On the 23rd of March 1757, the British launched a preemptive strike on the French outpost of Chandernagore. This attack infuriated Siraj-ud-Dowla, who saw it as a blatant violation of the treaty he had just signed.
In the year 1776, Austria ends the use of interrogation by torture. Torture is the deliberate infliction of physical and psychological pain with the purpose of obtaining information or extorting a confession from the victim and thus enabling a conviction. It can also be the penalty itself. The systematic use of torture in criminal procedures dates back to the earliest civilizations. Austria ends interrogation torture after Empress Maria Theresa issues an official decree lobbied by her son Joseph II and Chancellor Wenzel Anton von. Year 1913, Mahatma Gandhi leaves the Tolstoy farm in Transvaal, South Africa.
He ended up staying for 21 years. An important symbol of his life here is the Tolstoy farm located southwest of Johannesburg. The farm initially belonged to a farmer named Herman Kallenbach. He was so impressed with the peaceful way of life at the Phoenix settlement that he offered Gandhi his own farm near Johannesburg. He wanted Gandhi to start another colony. All those who had lost their jobs and homes due to participating in the Satyagrah movements could live here. The new colony was established in 1910. It was named the Tolstoy Farm, after the great Russian author whom Gandhi admired. It was here in South Africa that Gandhi developed his Satyagrah philosophy of passive resistance. On the Tolstoy farm, he and his followers lived out this philosophy. The Tolstoy farm thus became the first ashram to be initiated and organized by Gandhi. Here, people lived as one family. Gandhi spent much of his time at this Tolstoy farm. He was engaged in teaching children here. At the Tolstoy farm, Gandhi took the decision to hold co-educational classes, encouraging boys and girls to do everything together. On his 152nd birthday anniversary, Vion visits the Tolstoy farm, a settlement that is reminiscent of Gandhi's life in South Africa. We spoke to Javi Ravji, who is the chairman of the Mahatma Gandhi Remembrance Organization and the person responsible for the farm.
Herman Kallenbach, who was a great follower of Gandhi and a great follower of Tolstoy farm, had a piece of land. And when he was approached for some land by Gandhi, he found it most appropriate to partake the farm that he had. And because of his love for Tolstoy, he was a great poet, a Russian poet. He dedicated this farm to Gandhi as part of the passive resistance, and hence it was called Tolstoy Farm.
In the year 1917, Royal Bank of Canada takes over Quebec Bank. Quebec Bank was founded on June 9, 1818 to meet a perceived need by some merchants and residents of Quebec City. The Royal Bank took over the troubled Union Bank of Canada in Winnipeg in 1925, adding 327 branches and $115 million in deposits to its business.
Where it financed the lumber and timber industries, here it mainly supported the merchants in the area and became known as the Merchant Bank. The bank's personal and commercial banking operations stretch well over 34 countries. And next to this, the RBC is a major player in the world of wealth management for retail investors and international investment banking services. The Royal Bank of Canada is listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, and yes, even on the Swiss Stock Exchange.
In the year 1929, US and Canada agree to preserve Niagara Falls.
Every year, this natural wonder is visited by about 14 million tourists. Everyone dreams of taking a photo here, refreshing themselves in the cool spray of the waterfall, and of course, tossing in a coin for luck. It would seem, what mysteries could possibly be hiding in a place with such a huge flow of people? It turns out it still has its secrets. Some of them are pretty eerie, but I still try to unravel them. Today, I'm going to tell you something that likely isn't told in geography lessons. We're going to visit one of the most terrifying places within the vicinity of the waterfall. Then we're going to learn about the brave people who risk their lives for the sake of conquering the dangerous element. We'll then walk along the bed of the Niagara River and discover many interesting things. It's time to get out your raincoats. The journey begins. We used to refer to it simply as Niagara Falls, but in fact, this is a whole complex of waterfalls on the Niagara River. Horseshoe Falls is a waterfall located in the Canadian province of Ontario, and American Falls and Bridal Veil Falls in the state of New York, USA. Niagara Falls serves as a kind of border between the two countries. Its history began about 16,000 years ago during the last ice age. At that time, the northern regions of the North American continent were covered by a glacier more than 1.5 kilometers or 1 mile thick. When the ice retreated, the Great Lakes were formed. About 12,000 years ago, the waters flowing from the lakes made a path for themselves, later cutting a channel, the Niagara River. The lakes were arranged in a cascade, and the water flowed from one to the other. This is how one of the world's most famous waterfalls was born. Today, its size is admired. You can draw a parallel between it and the world's most famous attractions. For example, the height of Niagara Falls can be compared to the Arc de Triomphe in Paris or the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa, and the speed of its flow is so incredible that it's comparable to a tsunami. It would take the average family about 7.5 years to use up the volume of water that flows through Niagara Falls in just 1 second. But what's hidden behind this mighty column of water? I'll start with the fact that Devil's Hole is located on the territory of the national park. This is the name of a cave, which it's best to steer clear of. This may not seem very scientific, but it's believed that evil spirits live here. And for anyone who dares to climb inside, trouble awaits. It sounds improbable, but even in the guidebooks, this place is not recommended to visit. Fatal accidents always happen here. The sinister power of the cave was tested in the 17th century by the famous explorer of North America, La Salle. Legend has it that an evil spirit spoke to him and ordered him to return home immediately and end his expeditions and exploration of the world. The traveler ran out of the cave in horror, but chose not to believe the evil spirit. He continued to conquer new lands. Bad luck came to him one by one. Diseases, pirates, shipwrecks. But La Salle continued his expedition. Unfortunately, somewhere off the coast of Texas, it all came to an end. Tired sailors mutinied and simply killed their leader. The predictions of the evil spirit came true. We can only wonder if it was just a beautiful legend or really the machinations of the same spirit. But in the 18th century, something much worse happened here. In the year 1763, 81 British soldiers met their death here. They were attacked by the Seneca Indian tribe. The natives outnumbered their opponents by at least 3.5 to 1. The outcome of the battle was predictable. Some were killed, some were thrown into the abyss. Then the horses and wagons were also thrown in. After this terrible story, the place was considered cursed. There's another feature of the waterfall. The fact is that in the summer, the water flow becomes weaker than in other seasons, and at night, it generally decreases by half. Who or what is stealing the water from the waterfall? It turns out that these are power plants. A strict schedule for water intake from the waterfall was developed in the middle of the 20th century. This was done on account of tourism. In order to continue attracting thousands of people to the waterfall every day, it was necessary to maintain the same water pressure. Therefore, it was decided to conduct the main water intake at night and during the low tourist season. However, there were times in the history of the waterfall when it could have lost its tourists altogether, just because it stopped. In the mid-19th century, this stop lasted 30 hours. A strong storm broke the ice on Lake Erie, and one of the ice flows blocked the course of the Niagara River. This natural dam shifted only when the wind changed direction. 121 years later, the waterfall dried up again, but this time it was a planned operation. Unprecedented measures to stop the waterfall were taken in order to preserve it and reduce rock erosion. A temporary stone-earth dam was built. The best specialists were sent to study the riverbed and repair any damage. Deteriorating pieces were fixed together with bolts. All of their forces were thrown into the fight against erosion. When the work was finished, the artificial dam was blown up and the waterfall resumed its torrents. Stopping the waterfall revealed not only piles of stones and many coins, bodies were also found under the waterfall. Surprisingly, there were only 2 of them. There should have been a whole cemetery. About 40 people die here every year. But it seems that the bodies of others are simply carried away from the waterfall by the rapid river. In general, jumping into the waterfall was once considered almost a folk sport. Since the 19th century, it has attracted daredevils from all over the world. First, people tried sending a boat with animals on board down the waterfall. These pioneers were a bear, a bison, 2 foxes, and 2 geese. But only 1 goose survived. People weren't deterred by such a bleak result. It's believed that the tradition of jumping from the waterfall was established by a certain Sam Patch. He jumped from a high tower into the gorge below the waterfall and survived. Then the crazy race to conquer the stormy elements began. People tried swimming under the waterfall, going over it in barrels, and even huge rubber balls. As you can imagine, few managed to survive. Other daredevils chose a way of conquering the waterfall by air. They walked on a tight wire or rope from one side of the gorge to the other. It was only in the year 2012 that a brave man dared to pass over the waterfall from one country to another. His feat is now considered the longest tightrope walk in history. The coast of the Niagara River also has its secrets. Here, just 12 kilometers, almost 7.5 miles upstream from Niagara Falls, more than 20,000 artifacts have been found. The earliest ones are at least 4,000 years old. These finds open a window into the distant times when people lived a nomadic life and engaged in hunting, fishing, and collecting plants. This is revealed by the tools found here. Stones were used to make arrowheads and spears, as well as drills. Later artifacts were also found near Niagara Falls. They include bullets that seem to date back to the 1930s or 40s. More secrets of Niagara Falls will be revealed in future stops at the waterfall. Centuries-old rocks contain many more fossils, and how many interesting things might be hidden at the bottom of the lake. In 50 years, progress will have taken a step forward. You'll definitely be able to discover and study more artifacts. The waterfall is planned to be stopped once again to replace the century-old pedestrian bridges. This operation was supposed to begin in the year 2019, but due to funding, it was postponed indefinitely.
In the year 1954, the 2nd of January, India established its highest civilian awards, the Bharat Ratna and the Padma Vibhushan. The Bharat Ratna is the highest civilian award of the Republic of India. The award was originally limited to achievements in the arts, literature, science, and public services, but the government expanded the criteria to include any field of human endeavor in December 2011. The recommendations for the Bharat Ratna are made by the Prime Minister to the President, with a maximum of 3 nominees being awarded per year. Padma Vibhushan. The award is conferred for exceptional and distinguished service, without distinction of race, occupation, position, or sex. The criteria include service in any field, including service rendered by government servants, but excludes those working with the public sector undertakings, with the exception of doctors and scientists. The Padma Vibhushan was reclassified into 3 different awards. The Padma Vibhushan, the highest of the 3, followed by the Padma Bhushan and the Padma Shri.